and welcome to another HanDrinksSolo wine info video where today we will be discussing the Dutoitskloof Nebbiolo 2020. Now at this point, anyone who knows anything about Nebbiolo will be screaming silly things like, "No, it needs time! Infanticide! But for now, you're going to have to just set your prejudice aside while I get through the agenda for this video, which is first of all to wax lyrical about Nebbiolo's charisma, stemming partially from the contradiction of having a particularly long and well-documented written history while also managing to somehow remain largely unexplored with regards to its heritage. Secondly, I want to explore another Nebbiolan contradiction, which stems in part from an impressively mismatched set of sensory stimuli, which combine to form the overall Nebbiolo experience, also known as the Nebbenheimer, the Nebberoodle, the Grateful Neb, Bullet for my Neb in Time, or the notorious NEB. And finally, we will discuss the wine in the glass, which manages to somehow contradict the already contradictory set of data that we have about this supremely loved and feared cultivar. Okay, so we mostly know that Nebbiolo comes from northwest Italy in the Piedmont region, and I say mostly because honestly it could have been dropped here by some bizarre alien spaceship from another dimension. Recently, researchers did DNA sampling on over 200 cultivars from Piedmont alone in order to try and discover the parentage of Nebbiolo, and at the end of it we are none the wiser. In wine folk parlance, Nebbiolo is referred to as the grape of kings, not to be confused with Cabernet Sauvignon, which gets referred to as the king of grapes. Now, we can argue all day as to which one we think is cooler, but there is certainly no contest when it comes to discussing which one is older. Potentially, Nebbiolo is 2,000 years old. Cabernet Sauvignon, in contrast, is only about 600 years old. And if you need more context, the Coffea arabica bean, from which we get our beloved coffee beverage, has only been cultivated for about 500 years. So Nebbiolo really does pull rank with regards to age, hence the wildly popular moniker, the Grandmaster Neb. In case you're wondering where I got the 2,000-year time span from, well, it was Pliny the Elder in the 1st century AD that gave some pretty precise descriptions of how good the grog was coming out of the region that is today called Barolo. By all accounts, it seems very clear that these were indeed Nebbiolo-based wines. But if you have a penchant for absolute certainty, you'd need to wait another 1,200 years or so before Nebbiolo is mentioned as a grape in writing. But then again, if you do have a penchant for absolute certainty, you're probably going to hate Nebbiolo in general. As I said, we don't even know who his parents are, and we may never know, especially if he is descended from two equally ancient cultivars that have now gone extinct. And you might say, okay, I get it. He's old. So is Bono. That doesn't mean I want to drink him. Well, another part of the appeal to what I like to call Nebbiolo Grande is its insane flavor profile in the glass. First up, when we look at the wine in the glass, its supremely light color lulls us into a false sense of security that it's going to be all light and ethereal. And this false sense of comfort is basically the wine version of that slow chug up the hill in a roller coaster before you reach the crescendo and then get dropped down the other side faster than a Boney M Christmas album. Because when you taste this guy, he's like two wild boars brawling in a burlap bag. On the one hand, you have sweet dried roses and cherry fruit and anise and fennel, which in turn smashes into hot tar and smoke and broken clay pots and earth and leather. And if that contradiction wasn't enough, the tannins that you did not see coming dry out your mouth faster than Pavarotti naked on a cold day. And speaking of tannins, it is these nigh on galactic tannins that make lovers of the Neb DMC scream silly things about needing to wait before drinking. Because some classic Nebbiolo wines that come from regions like Barolo, for example, sometimes have to be aged as long as 30 years. And even then, when you open them, you might find the tannins overwhelming. But in the modern era, winemakers are beginning to understand that life is too short to wait for Barolo. And so they're using technology in order to produce wines that faithfully represent the characteristics of the cultivar without necessarily extracting all those tannins. This means that they can be drunk in their youth. Which brings us to this bottle of Nebbiolo. Dutoitskloof have been producing Nebbiolo for over 20 years, and it really has been getting better and better. Not least of all because of the technology that I mentioned earlier. The winemakers Sean Thompson and Tion Loebscher use what is called roto tanks, which are tanks on their side that slowly rotate so that you can keep the cap of the grapes wet and therefore fermenting properly without needing to do rough punch downs or pump overs. And it's this lack of punch downs that are really important in explaining partially what we taste in the glass. Now, it's worth noting that the tannins are definitely still present, because Nebbiolo is an incredibly high tannic grape. But relative to what you might get out of a more classic region, this is incredibly drinkable with really well-defined fruit elements. Couched within these tannins, you have these amazing juicy notes of cherry and raspberry and pomegranate and even some softer, sweeter red plum. Perhaps more importantly, when it comes to the balance of this wine, the fruit elements last every bit as long as the tannins do. And if you happen to not be drinking on the night, this is a wine from which you can get as much joy in the sniffing as you do from the sipping. On the nose, there's a really interesting mix of crushed Mediterranean herbs and maybe even some fresh cucumber set against sweeter aromas of a little bit of rose petal, some cherry fruit, raspberry, and definitely some lavender, which is quite delightful. And then we also know that the wine has spent about 16 months in a combination of French and Hungarian oak, which is why you can definitely pick up a faint hint of sweet vanilla spice in there. So that's all we have time for on this particular day, but there will be more time and there will be more days and there will be more videos. In fact, if you enjoyed today's video, why not subscribe to the HanDrinksSolo YouTube channel, where there are literally hundreds of wines that explore wine science, wine history, unusual cultivars, and rising winemaking stars in the South African winelands. Oh yeah, and if you're looking for more South African Nebbiolo to hunt down, then have a look at the text on this video page on the HanDrinksSolo website, where I will list a whole bunch of South African Nebbiolos that are incredible expressions of what's possible in the South African winelands.